Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with Gary Black. Okay, I'm not really here with Gary Black, but this is a picture of Gary Black. Gary had a tweet yesterday or today about Tesla full self-driving, and I wanted to break down what Gary gets wrong. And I want to be clear, I'm critical of Gary a lot. I think in doing this particular tweet, it was really instructive in helping to understand how the Wall Streeters, how people who don't really get the engineering side of Tesla fail to understand why Tesla is different. But I'm going to dive into it right now. Are you ready? Let's go. Before we dive into the tweet thread, I just want you to see the Wall Street background. Gary worked at Goldman Sachs. He was the chief investment officer for global equities at Goldman Sachs. He was chief executive officer, president, chief investment officer of Janus Capital Group. These are Wall Street style institutions. He has more experience than that, but I wanted you to see that. He went to Harvard Business School, got an MBA in finance. He went to Wharton, which is a top business school, and got a bachelor's degree in finance. This is a guy who is classic Wall Street education and experience. So let's dive into what he said, and I want to really get into what he's getting wrong here. I think this is challenging for people to understand. It's clearly challenging for Gary to understand. Gary has a big following who they buy into what he says. So let's see what he's got wrong. So he says, my view on Tesla FSD has remained constant for at least 2 years. I agree that Gary has been pretty consistent on his view, with his view about FSD, what he says, and we're going to dive into that. He says, once FSD is level 4, i.e., virtually intervention free. Let's dive into that first. I'm not big on the level system. I don't know what virtually intervention free means. That's not the traditional meaning of level 4. Level 4 is the car can drive without supervision. This is the level 4, the level system, level 2, level 4, level 5, whatever you want to call it, is from the Society of Automotive Engineers. It's a system where a level 2 vehicle cannot drive without human supervision. I forget what level 3 is. A level 4 vehicle can drive without human supervision, i.e., no one in the car in certain circumstances. And a level 5 system can drive without human supervision anywhere. That's what, as my understanding of the level system. It's not virtually intervention free. That's not what level 4 means. I personally don't think the level system is even relevant anymore. I'll say my own system, which I'm not saying is adopted by anybody, is with the way FSD works now. I see two steps. Step one is they tell, like, where we're at now is level 2. You have to supervise, you have to pay attention, you have to, there are nags, you have to touch the wheel, you have to show that you're paying attention. If you're not paying attention, you might get dinged or whatever, or the car might refuse to keep driving. The next level that I see is where they tell you you no longer have to pay attention, there's no more nags, but you have to stay in the driver's seat and be ready to take over if the car says, "Hey, I need you to take over." That is effectively level 4, that it can drive most places, but there are places it can't drive or situations it can't drive in, and it calls on you to take over. That's sort of like what level 4 is. And the next level beyond that is when you don't need to sit in the driver's seat, you can sit in the back seat, or you don't even need a human in the car. And even within that, it may be that there's places it won't go, but it will generally drive without a human in the car or with a human in the back seat. And it may just be that, like, I won't go there, right? And then there's probably a future level where it will drive anywhere. Okay, so that's, I think he's wrong on what level 4 is. He says once FSD is level 4, or virtually intervention free, Tesla will sell more EVs as one of the safest automated vehicles on the market. I don't know that that's really a driving factor in whether people will buy Tesla cars. I don't use that as the way I model whether people will drive Tesla cars. I think Tesla cars are already the best cars on the road. And what will drive more people to buy Tesla cars is if they're able to bring the price down. And maybe, I don't generally agree with Gary or Ross or Alexander or whoever else has been advocating advertising. Maybe Tesla needs to raise more awareness. People need to know more about how great it is to own a Tesla. But I think fundamentally there's more demand than Tesla can meet as long as they can get the price to the point where people can afford it. And they are working on getting the price down, and the next generation vehicle platform is going to bring the price down so dramatically that sales are going to skyrocket. And I think over time they will, once they have the next generation vehicle out, you're going to see modifications to Model 3 and Y and S and X that will bring their prices down, and that will enable them to sell more of those vehicles. Assuming we don't go to a world where people just ride in Robotaxis and don't bother owning cars. So selling cars is not necessarily the future that matters. So he says that's why I include FSD level 4 as a 2024 catalyst. I don't know that the market will fully react to FSD reaching that level where you don't have to pay attention anymore. I'm not sure or when it will react, and I don't know when it'll happen. I do think it's likely to happen. I mean, I think this is not a bad call, that we will see FSD reach that level towards the end of this year, sometime next year. I think it's very likely it reaches that level sometime next year. How long it takes the market to figure out how valuable that is I'm not clear whether the market figures that out in 2 weeks or 2 months or 6 months. Wall Street has been notoriously slow at understanding Tesla's improvements. This is something that seems like it would be a really substantial real world improvement in the cars, and that very understandable to people. Hey, the car will drive itself and you don't have to pay attention anymore. How much is they going to charge for FSD at that point? Will people be willing to do it? Elon has said anybody, they'll give like a 2 month free trial or something like that. Maybe that does it. With that said, he says, I have been notably cautious on the progress of FSD for as long as I can remember. True, despite Uber Bull's constant refrain that it's already virtually intervention free. That's not what I've said. I think other people have, like Omar seems to keep talking about all the zero interventions drive. I have a lot of interventions. Most of my nearly all of my interventions these days are not safety related. The vast majority of my interventions are lane change related, that it's not aggressive enough in making lane changes, or it occasionally makes a dumb lane change that's not life threatening. Just like, why are you going to the left lane? We're making a right turn in a quarter mile. But I don't really have a whole lot of other interventions. And there's one particular intervention I have at the intersection of Florida State Route 528 and Interstate 95 going westbound, where it was it's a mapping and navigation problem, not an FSD problem. The navigation gets it wrong, and that's not really an FSD problem. But it translates into an FSD problem because the car tries to do something it shouldn't do because it's following the navigation. Okay, so he says, as a non-engineer but student of history, I take the view, this is where it gets significant. I take the view that every innovation in the history of the auto industry has been quickly copied. So to think Tesla will be the only one that can master generalized autonomy seems naive, to which the Uber bulls respond that software is different. So this is a big difference. Gary's view has been Tesla's not going to solve FSD, or it's going to be a long way off. But when they do, if Tesla does get there first, basically Gary doesn't think Tesla has a big advantage in FSD. It really comes down to Gary really doesn't. He really is like in that camp where Tesla's just a car company. He doesn't really see that Tesla is more than a car company. And the biggest thing I would say is, in every innovation in the history of the auto industry has been quickly copied, is a not first principles view of the world. He's not really thinking about the world in the same way I think you should think about the world. My favorite example is okay, every innovation in the history of the space industry has been quickly copied, right? And then SpaceX landed the first orbital rocket booster. On December 21, 2015, SpaceX began the age of landing orbital rocket boosters and reusing them. 7.5 years ago, that SpaceX landed the first orbital rocket booster, almost to the day. 7.5 years later, no one else has even tried. You have extremely well-funded entities like the Chinese space industry, the US space industry, United Launch Alliance, the Europeans, whatever. No one has even tried to propulsively land an orbital rocket booster. Rocket Lab did try to catch a rocket booster. I don't think they've gotten to the point of trying to reuse a rocket booster, but nobody has really made a serious effort to land and reuse an orbital rocket booster. And and no one's even tried. So the point of somebody actually doing it is probably the rest of the space industry is at least 8 years behind SpaceX. So you got to look at, what is Tesla doing? He says Uber bulls respond that software is different. It's more than just software. It is software, but it's more than just software. So this is a really critical thing to understand about why Tesla is different, why Tesla is likely to solve self-driving before everybody else, and why Tesla's lead is going to be so big, comparable to SpaceX's lead in landing orbital rocket boosters. Tesla's lead is probably 7, 8 years or more. So here's why. And again, this is something that it seems like Gary doesn't understand. It's not just software, it's hardware. Every Tesla, since roughly 2018, maybe before, that has come equipped with 8 cameras and a neural net chip. And that neural net chip, as the car is driving down the road, is watching the road, identifying objects, and making predictions about what they will do, where they will move, or so on. And as the car is driving down the road, if if it changes its identification of an object, or if an object moves in a way differently than expected, that is something that it notices. In other words, the chip made a prediction, that's a stop sign. if half a second later it says, wait a minute, that's a yield sign, and then half a second later it says, no, it's a stop sign, that's called something that they call flicker. Okay, we've got a failure to identify an object. Let's send that up, and we can now use the supercomputers at the mothership and data from all the other cars to retrain the hardware and software of the cars to do a better job of identifying stop signs and yield signs. And then I see a pedestrian walking in the road, and it's predicting how the pedestrian's going to move. And the pedestrian moves significantly differently from how the car predicted the pedestrian would move. Okay, we've got something that isn't consistent with what the hardware and software predicted. Let's send that back up to the mothership. Let's accumulate other video clips from other cars that had similar experiences, and let's retrain the cars to make better predictions about what these things are going to do, what these objects in the road are going to do. That is something that Tesla has been doing since at least 2018. I don't know if they had comparable neural net chips in the cars before, but they currently have in the ballpark of 4 million cars on the roads in the world that are doing this on a daily basis, uploading data to Tesla supercomputers and constantly working on improving identifications and improving predictions. And that's what they need to, in order to be able to navigate through the real world, you need to identify what objects are and predict where they're going so that you can navigate through the real world and navigate between them without hitting them. And they're adding to that that at some point the neural nets will also control the car, and it will make predictions about how its navigation through that world will work. Still doing that to some extent. So all these things are happening. No one else has a fleet of cars anywhere near this scale. No one else has comparable neural net chips in the cars. Almost no one else has a volume of cameras. No one has the same approach, which is we're going to do it vision only. So, if you're going to do it with LiDAR, that creates a set of problems. If you're going to do it with high definition maps, that creates a problem. If you're using radar, that creates problems. Tesla's doing it with a particular approach that no one else is using. So if someone came along and said, "Hey, we like what Tesla's doing, we're going to do that," well, you'd have to get your cameras and your neural net chips. You have to develop a neural net chip, right? You'd have to get your cameras and neural net chips in millions of cars. You'd have to get billions of miles of data. You'd have to figure out how to harvest which data. You'd have to, and then Tesla has these supercomputers. They have 14,000 GPU cluster of NVIDIA's. They have Project Dojo is now sort of online, and they're about to start production of Project Dojo, which is another set of supercomputers that are more optimized for video training. You've got all this going on. Any other company would basically have to repeat what Tesla's doing. The idea that you're just going to get a Tesla and rip out the chip and then like basically reverse engineer it, that seems very unlikely. It is possible that neural network models will get better and it'll be possible to train vehicles to drive on less data with less computing power, but I don't, and that also computing power will increase in general, so there'll be more computing power available. So that may shrink the lead, but Tesla's lead is that big. And there's a bunch of reasons why the lead's that big. And another thing that Gary misses, he says here, I believe many similar robotaxi offerings will come to market at around the same time. So there's another advantage that Tesla has that Gary doesn't understand. It's frustrating because I know Gary goes to these events. I know he went to Battery Day. I know he goes to other Tesla events. And he probably watches the presentations, doesn't understand. When Tesla makes, let's say, a Model 3, and they design the Model 3 to operate in a certain way, the cost of, if you get to the point where you hit the robotaxi world, the cost of that Model 3, let's say Tesla owns a Model 3 that's running in its robotaxi fleet. The cost per mile to Tesla of that vehicle operating, when you add in the cost of producing the vehicle, the cost of all the hardware, the cost of all the software, everything, and the cost of electricity and the cost of tires and the cost of Tesla's cost per mile is going to be in the ballpark of 15 to 20 cents a mile for that vehicle. The average American vehicle costs its owner about 70 cents a mile, right? And the self-driving cars we know about, the Waymos and Cruise vehicles, they're costing the owners like $2 a mile or more. So to be able to deliver, and if you're going to sell robotaxi rides, you have to cost less than Uber, which is around $2.50 a mile. So for Tesla, with a Model 3 or a Model Y or a next generation vehicle costing, let's say, 15 cents a mile or less to operate, you're going to be able to sell rides for $2 a mile and make a huge profit. But if you're Waymo or your Cruise, and your cost of operation is $2 a mile or more, then can you really, and keep in mind roughly half the miles are empty, right? Your cost per paid mile is $4 a mile, but you got to sell rides for less than $2.50 a mile to make sense, to make any kind of profit. It's going to be very hard for the competitors to get to the point where they can deliver rides at a price that's less than their cost of delivering the ride, where Tesla's got this manufacturing advantage, where they're manufacturing vehicles at lower cost and they've made their vehicles hyper efficient. So there's so many advantages, and I'm probably missing stuff, but there's so many advantages that Tesla has in a robotaxi world that Gary doesn't seem to understand. So he says, I believe many similar robotaxi offerings will come to market around the same time, which means any robotaxi revenue model has to be demand and market share based rather than traditional hours per day times miles per hour times dollars per hour times Tesla share that seems to populate Twitter. Let's be clear, my model is really simple. To oversimplify, let's just say the robotaxi does 100,000 miles a year and it gets 60,000 paid miles a year on the theory that the robo-taxi network will optimize a bit and only 40% of miles will be unpaid. Hey, if you optimize where the vehicles are going, you can probably get down to 40% of miles are unpaid and 60% of miles are paid, right? So you do 100,000 miles. Let's say you only make $1 a mile. You've gotten to past the point where you're selling them for $2 a mile and you're selling them for $1 a mile. And your cost of operation is 15 cents a mile, let's say, and only 60% of your miles are paid. So you made $60,000. 60,000 miles times $1 a mile is $60,000, and your cost of the 100,000 miles was $15,000. You made $45,000 on each car. That's a model that I think makes sense. It's not hours per day times miles per hour times dollars per hour. It's just a really simple ballpark it at 100,000 miles a year. You get a simpler model. And 100,000 miles a year is not crazy. And making the kind of money we're talking about, I know of Uber drivers who've made $100,000 a year or more. Not to say that that's guaranteed that'll happen, but to say that on average you're going to generate $45,000 a year in gross profit is not crazy at $1 a mile. It's likely in the early days you're going to charge $2 a mile as initially you're undercutting Uber, but you can't lower the price too much because if there's not enough vehicles to meet the demand that you create, then you have a problem there. But his model here has to be demand and market share based. If Tesla has the lead, then at the beginning, Tesla's the only company in the robotaxi market. Now they're still sharing the market with Ubers and Lyfts and taxis, and people own their own cars and they're making a decision about how I'm going to do this or they're going to ride a bicycle. The market isn't so simple and it's just a robotaxi market. It's I want to get from point A to point B. What are my choices about how to get there? Maybe I can take a subway, maybe I can take a bus, maybe I can ride in an Uber. There's a lot of different choices that people have. When you say it has to be demand and market share based, well, what's the market? But once you're able to deliver rides at a lower price than Uber, then you're basically going to take the entire Uber market. And the more you bring the price down, the larger the market gets. And if you can get your price down to under 70 cents a mile, which is what the average American spends on owning a car, and all of a sudden people decide really under $1 a mile, there's going to be a chunk of Americans who are spending more than that on their car. You're going to start getting people to decide, I'm not going to bother owning a car anymore. I'm just going to ride robotaxis when I need a ride. Like I'm on a trip right now, and I decided not to rent a car, figuring cost of Ubering if I needed to was going to be less than the cost of renting a car. It's going to be about $300 for the trip if I rented a car versus I figured maybe I spent $50 a day on Ubers, and then it turned out friends picked me up and drove me places, and the only Uber I'm going to take is to the airport later today, right? So I saved a lot of money by not bothering to have my own car. And I think we're going to see that in the future that a bunch of people are going to decide, I don't drive that many miles, so I won't spend that much on robotaxi, or it's the hassle of having to own a car. People don't appreciate the amount of time you put into owning a car and the different hassles that you get owning a car. A bunch of people are going to decide that. And that's down in the future when the price of robotaxi rides drop to $1 a mile or less, you're going to start seeing more and more people shift to not bothering to own a car. Defining the market for robo-taxi rides is tricky. And I think Gary doesn't really understand that one either. And these are things I think he just doesn't get. I would love to have a conversation with Gary about this topic and go back and forth. The problem is that Gary typically refuses. I've done this three times I think already, where I've suggested that Gary and I do a video together where we talk about this stuff, and he refuses to have the conversation. He needs a moderator, whatever. We can never work it out. So I've given up on trying to do videos with Gary because he's just not going to do it. It's going to be silly. I think fundamentally he knows he doesn't really understand this stuff, and he doesn't want to do an interview with somebody who's going to ask him the kind of questions that I'm asking and talk about things the way I'm talking about it and basically show he doesn't really get it. And the problem is he doesn't want to get it. Because I think if we had this conversation, like he's going to watch this video and he's just going to dismiss me as wrong. We had the conversation back and forth. I think I might be able to explain it to him and he might finally start to get it, but maybe he's just incapable of getting it. So let's go on with his tweet thread because there's more to this tweet. He said, I've also challenged the vision only approach to FSD and been berated by Uber bulls for my non tech background. Yet here we are today where high definition radar is being added in hardware 4 to improve FSD efficacy. Okay, first of all, we don't know that hardware 4 is going to include high definition radar. Will they be adding high definition radar? Maybe. Maybe I missed something, but as far as I know, Tesla has consistently said we're doing vision only. That it's been very clear that it's vision only. They have not said. Elon has said high definition radar might be an advantage, but so far as we know, there is no high definition radar in hardware 4. And it's not clear that high definition radar is necessary. I drive a car with 2 cameras and a biological neural net, and I don't use radar when I drive a car. And every human on the road pretty much drives a car with 2 cameras. Some people do it with 1, and a biological neural net, and pretty much no one uses radar to drive their cars. There's no reason that a self-driving car can't drive without radar, can't drive without LiDAR, etc. So Gary goes on, he says, I'll continue to view FSD as a level 2 driver assist tool until it gets to level 4, which could take another 18 to 24 months. It could. I think it'll be quicker than that, level 4, or that they take away the nags. I think with the growth in Dojo and computing power and the growth in data that's being generated, I think it's likely that we're going to see an acceleration and improvement of FSD. I think the improvement in models that we're seeing going to version 11 and now version 12 is coming sometime in maybe the next few months. I think these gradual changes and improving things as Dojo allows larger neural net models to be trained at higher velocity or higher speed, so you get more better, deeper updates more frequently. I think we're going to see a big improvement. But for now, I'm not more right than Gary on this question. We won't know until we get to the next level of FSD until we get there. He says, my Tesla price target assumes no incremental value for Robotaxi. I assume Tesla gets a modestly higher take rate, 15% instead of 10%, once it gets to level 4, and that Tesla can take more EV share if it convinces EV customers that Teslas are safer than those that haven't achieved level 4 autonomy yet. My 6 to 12 month Tesla price target remains $320. So there's a whole bunch wrong with this paragraph. First of all, the idea that there's EV customers. There are vehicle customers. So the first challenge is to persuade customers or get customers to realize you want to own an electric vehicle instead of a gas vehicle. People who own gas vehicles are perfectly capable of driving electric vehicles. It's not harder to drive them. In fact, in many ways, it's easier. Not that big of a jump. It's not necessarily that much more of a jump than going from a subcompact car to an SUV or a pickup truck, right? It's a change in the type of vehicle you're driving. It's not that big of a change. The idea that there's an EV market and a regular gas vehicle market is a fiction that people who are stuck in the old ways see things that way. The idea that the take rate would only jump to 15% when we get to that next level seems unlikely. I think it's certainly possible that the price goes up dramatically and that affects the take rate, but then the revenue generated is higher. But he assumes no incremental value for Robotaxi. So here's the thing. Gary doesn't look at the world in a probabilistic way. He says this is the way it's going to happen, and that's it. He does recognize there's some variability. It might take another 18 to 24 months to get there, but he doesn't see it adding that much value. I would say what you should do is you should decide, I'm going to assign a probability to the Robotaxi scenario that Warren described, right? My scenario is we get to a point where the cars drive themselves and you're selling rides for $1 a mile and it's costing you 15 cents a mile and you end up making $45,000 per vehicle, and you go out to 2030 and you ask yourself, how much revenue does that generate? And if Tesla has a 10 million vehicle Robotaxi fleet, and to simplify, let's say each vehicle is generating $50,000 in gross profit, and you have a 10 million vehicle fleet, and this is the only thing Tesla has, right? That's $500 billion a year in gross profit. Gross profit in 2022 was like 20 billion. So that's a 25x. You add in everything else that Tesla's doing, you're going to have, let's say, $600 billion in gross profit. So it's like a 30x. And it's growing fast. To assign zero, when you say, I'm not going to consider that at all, means I'm assigning zero probability of that happening. And I think you have to assign some probability of that happening. Now, for me, that probability is pretty high. that's like a better than 50% probability that Tesla will get there, because I feel like I see the future, and I see the future as Tesla gets Robotaxi down, and they get there first, and not only get there first, but they're improving rapidly, and nobody else gets there within at least a few years. Like I said, it's an 8-year gap between SpaceX landing rocket boosters and anybody else even trying it, looks like. So it may be an 8-year gap before the next person solves FSD. And by the time the next person solves FSD, self-driving cars, Tesla's going to have been continuously improving theirs, and they're going to be a lot better. And Tesla's got the manufacturing cost advantage, and Tesla's got the efficiency advantage. There's so many advantages to why Tesla's going to dominate the robotaxi world. That's the kind of thing that Gary doesn't get. So even if you said, there's only a 10% chance that Tesla's going to get there by 2030. Now, 2030 is 7 years away. To say that Tesla's not likely to deliver a robotaxi world in 7 years is pretty. Now, maybe Gary just doesn't have the time horizon to think 7 years ahead. But if you think Tesla's going to 30x from today's price to 2030, so Tesla's currently let's say it's going to 10x, right? So Tesla's currently trading at, I'll call it $250 a share. In 2030, Tesla will be trading at $2,500 a share. What would you pay for a stock today if you knew it was going to be worth $2,500 in 2030? If you do rough discounting, if you believe that was going to happen, you'd probably pay $1,000 a share, maybe $800 a share for something like that. And the stock is currently trading at 260. So if you assign a 10% probability that that's going to happen, then you would have to increase your share price to account for the fact that, hey, the stock is really worth 800 today. So you would add, I'm making up a number, you'd add $80 to your share valuation. Or maybe you'd add $40. Maybe you'd say, well, that's from current share price to that, that's a $600 jump, 10% chance, I'll add $60, $500 jump, whatever. You add 40, 50, $60. That's what you would do if you were assigning a 10% probability to it. He's effectively assigning a 0% probability to a scenario he just doesn't believe is going to happen. Now, I'm looking at the world, and I'm not the only one who sees this, right? There's Stephen Mark Ryan sees it. I think Tony Seba sees it. ARK Invest sees it. We're heading towards a world where the cars drive themselves, where people decide not to own cars. And it's just a world, and he's not alone in this. There's a lot of people who just don't believe that people will stop owning cars. It's not to say that everyone will stop owning cars. I'll probably keep owning a car because I'm basically wealthy, and I'm, of course, going to be a lot wealthier if all this comes true, right? So I'm going to continue to own cars because I'm wealthy. But the average person, if they can save $3,000 a year by not owning a car and save 20 hours a year by not having to deal with the hassles of owning a car, they're going to jump on it. A big chunk of them are going to jump on it. Some people are going to cling to the old ways, and some people are going to say, this is dumb. Why would I bother spending money on a car when I can get a ride that'll drop me off at the front, pick me off at the front? I never have to scrape ice off a windshield. I never get into a cold car. I never get into a hot car. I never have to go do a car wash. I never have to change tires. I never have to shop for car insurance. All these robotaxi world makes life a lot easier. So if we're going to get there, some percentage of the population will adopt early. Some percent of the population will adopt a little more slowly. Some people resist. But you can see where we're heading towards a world where 10 million robotaxis, which replaces about 50 million cars globally, and where there's a 2 billion vehicle fleet, is not a big ask. This is the kind of thing that I think Gary doesn't understand. It's unfortunately doesn't understand it. It's unfortunate he's not willing to have a conversation with somebody who has a very different view and who's willing to challenge him on the things that he says. But I think this is pretty straightforward. I think that Gary is missing it. I think it's unfortunate. He's generally a bright guy. He's generally smart, especially in the ways of Wall Street, right? And in the ways of the world of investing. I'm not saying he represents all of Wall Street. I think there are people on Wall Street who do get it. Different people on Wall Street have different views. But he does kind of represent the Wall Street way of thinking, the Harvard Business School, Wharton School way of thinking that a lot of people have. And it would be nice if Gary could start to try to understand. He doesn't really understand the engineering side of Tesla. He doesn't really understand the AI side of Tesla. And like I said, I would love to have that conversation. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen. I just wanted people to understand this is what Gary's missing. This is why he's wrong. Why I think he's wrong about FSD, Robotaxi, etc. But that's enough about me and Gary. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, or tag me on Twitter and let me know. Tag us both on Twitter and let us know what you think. Please consider supporting me on the Locals platform, on Patreon, as a YouTube channel member, as a Twitter subscriber. Please check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. The Tesla Man t-shirt is my favorite t-shirt. A lot of people love this t-shirt. elonbits.com. Please check out my other videos, like this video, share, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.